Hello, parents and guardians, and welcome back to another Discipleship Debrief. So, this past Sunday, our youth group was in Mark chapter 10, and we read the first 12 verses, 1 to 12, and we talked about Jesus' teaching on divorce. That is the heading of that section, and so we broke it down like that. We talked first about what he taught about divorce, and then after that, what he taught about marriage, because a few of those verses show Jesus's true standards for marriage and his true beliefs about marriage, going all the way back to creation. And really to open, we talked about why are we talking about this? You're right. Looking around the room, there's a group of middle schoolers and a few high schoolers, and looking at them and, kind of chuckling and being like, well, realistically, none of you are close to marriage, and none of you are needing to put too much thought into what a godly marriage is going to look like for you. And yet, here we are talking about it. And so, first of all, we talk about these topics because we're guided by the text. We follow the text. And when Jesus talks about divorce, we're going to talk about divorce. And when Jesus talks about marriage, we're going to talk about marriage. And so we don't skip passages. We don't skip passages that we feel are less important to us for whatever reason. We don't skip passages that we think won't be pertinent to the audience. We don't skip passages that are difficult. We do it all. And on top of that, it is important for our students to understand why we hold the values we hold. Some of these students might have grown up in a household just hearing that divorce was bad or hearing that marriage was good and never really gotten to think much further about it than that. So it is good to understand why we believe something, not just that we believe it, basically. R.C. Sproul used to say that there's nothing more dangerous than a tradition without roots. A tradition without roots is just going to get destroyed. It needs to still be attached to something for it to hold up. So we want to we want our students to understand the roots of the tradition of marriage and why God designed it the way that he did. So that's what we did. We walked through Jesus's teaching. We saw that Jesus was firm that God only allowed divorce in the old covenant because of the hardness of heart of humanity. Humanity was incapable of achieving the standard for marriage that God had set in creation, and so he made allowances. And one of those was a certificate of divorce found in Deuteronomy 24. And it's not super explained, but the Pharisees had really taken that and they had walked with it and they were allowing divorce for any reason. And that's when Jesus comes in and he stops it. He shuts it down. So he says that they were allowed the certificate of divorce because of their hardness of heart, but that was not what God meant. And then he talks about creation and he talks about how the man and the woman were bound together and they left father and mother, and what God has combined, let not man separate. And so Jesus is firm on the fact that marriage is between one man and one woman, that marriage is a unique bond, not meant to be shared, and included in that bond is sex, and that marriage is meant to be this everlasting covenant. It is meant to be permanent when God brings people together. And so we talked about that. We talked about Jesus's standards that he sets forth for marriage. And similar to the Old Testament allowances, even some of the allowances that are made for New Testament believers in terms of divorce with sexual immorality in the marriage or abandonment in the marriage. So, in light of that, this week, as you seek to follow up with your student, I would advise you to reread this passage. And this might be a good time to have an honest conversation with your student about marriage and about divorce. They might have questions for you that they didn't ask me, and in weeks to come, they might have questions for me that they didn't ask you. But have an honest conversation with them about it. And the question I would ask them to really follow up and hone in on this lesson is, why is it important that you, right now, understand the standards that God sets for marriage? Why is it important that you, as a middle school boy or as a high school girl, understand the standards of marriage? And really, I think what is important here is that your student understands that they want to understand marriage now so that when they're actually going to get married down the line, or if they get married, that it's not some baseless tradition, It's not some arbitrary rule. It's not something that they can throw out the window. It has roots that they understand right now that they want to uphold God's standards for their entire life, so that when they get into a situation where those standards really come into play, they already want to uphold those standards. They already know why those standards are there, and they already know what they should do to uphold those standards, so that they may be mature believers upholding what God has set forth for us. So that is all I have for you this week. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is going out the week of Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy it with your families. And that is all. See you next time.